All right. Good evening, everyone. It's 5:30, and I call to order this workshop of the Victoria City Council. Our workshops are informal, so we'll get right to the agenda. There are two items on the agenda this evening, and our first is a sketch plan review for the Leitner property in downtown being proposed by Roars. Before we get into this item, I just want to note, so everyone is aware of what this where this proposed project is in the development process. So a sketch plat review is meant to be a high-level overview of a proposed project, and it's a step that we require here in Victoria, but it is not required by law. It helps bring transparency and awareness about projects and development in the community early on before any formal applications are submitted. So it is at this first glimpse of this project for the Planning Commission, Council, and the public. And it is a review item, and it is for discussion only. So it's not intended to be a formal review, but it does provide an opportunity for the developer to get feedback early on. So that's what we're doing here this evening. We will not be taking public comment on this. It's only a listening session and a discussion item for council. So on behalf of council, we want to extend thanks to everyone who's following this project and has taken time to attend the neighborhood meetings, chat with the developer, express concerns in person, or via emails to the council and the staff. And I want to assure you that we are listening. We've received those comments, and we are giving careful consideration to your questions and concerns as we learn about this project before us. So that being said, kicking us off the evening, our Community and Economic Development Director, Jen Brewington, and consulting planner Nathan First, please. First.
Thank you.
First it is. So Nathan and Jen, the floor is yours.
I'm getting a nod to just go right ahead. So it's nice to meet everyone, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Nathan First. I'm a planner with Bolton and Menk, helping to supplement some capacity with staff. So I've had the opportunity to do a review of the Leitner property proposal that's been put forward by Roars Companies. But before we get into that, I just want to make a quick note on sketch plat reviews generally. So the city has reviewed its kind of process for sketch plat reviews, and as you noted, there's no real formal actions taken by the city during this process, and so is kind of switching the review of sketch plats specifically, which is again that concept plan phase, to a workshop session in the future. So moving forward, all sketch plat reviews would be managed and presented really at the workshop or work session. So that's just a quick note for you on process. I will jump right into the review. So Roars Companies is the applicant and developer here. They have submitted a sketch plat application to receive that initial feedback on the proposal from both the Planning Commission and City Council. And reiterating again, no actions taken at this meeting. This process is really intended to guide the applicant through their subsequent applications that they'll have to make for the development. Those would include, for this one, preliminary plat, conditional use permit, planned unit development. I think those are the three applications they would be required to submit. Property owners within 350 feet of the subject property here, they were notified and invited to participate in a neighborhood meeting, which was held January 3rd. So I think most folks are familiar with the location of this site. This overall site is just south of 3 acres. It would consist of 7 existing parcels and some portions of unused platted right-of-way. So when all of that is combined, just south of 3 acres, the proposed site here would be developed with 149 apartment dwellings, 4,500 square feet of commercial space, and a total of 262 parking spaces. So there's some high-level figures, and we'll jump into a review of all of this. So the existing conditions on site. You can see an aerial on the screen in front of you. There are some notes here on the conditions. The grade on the north side of this site near the trail does kind of drop down. So you're going kind of downhill in that wooded hill. Again, wooded areas are present really primarily along that trail boundary. Existing structures on the site include houses, outbuildings, a barn, and then notably some gravel, paved drive, and parking areas. There is an environmental remediation review ongoing at this time, and so I'm sure that the applicant will be working with staff to help convey what that comes out with. when that's ready. So a really fuzzy picture on the screen in front of you. This is from the 2040 comp plan. This specific project site is guided by the comp plan as downtown mixed use. In that area, the guidance is for a density for residential development between 24 and 75 dwelling units per acre. This proposal is right almost smack dab in the middle at 52.4 units per acre as proposed. The city's comp plan really guides the central business district or downtown mixed use area towards smaller scale retail and office buildings in addition to vertical mixed use buildings with retail or office uses on the ground floor. So really trying to promote a mix of different uses downtown. In a review of the city's comprehensive plan, I identified one section that looked pretty important to this particular site, and that's for gateways. So really what this says is these are, in the city, there exist high-profile commercial nodes, which should be designed to have enduring architectural character, quality landscaping, and site design that presents buildings or site amenities as the focal point. Consideration should be given to the should be sensitive to neighborhood aesthetics and transition through landscape features, pedestrian connections, and strategic lighting. So moving on to the zoning for this area, as noted in the staff report, this is the central business district. The site is also located within the shoreline overlay. And so that extends over a majority of the downtown here. And that has some implications that are noted in the staff report for this process. Primarily, it's more of a procedural thing where the DNR is kind of notified throughout the development process. There are 3 different conditional use permits that are required for this specific proposal. That would be one for multiple family dwellings, which is a conditional use in the central business district. Building height for this proposal, which is greater than 35 feet, and a commercial use within the shoreline overlay district. This development is also anticipated to be considered through the planned unit development process. And this is, I would note, it's been a very common practice with the city of Victoria to work developments through that PUD process as they're proposed.
Mr. First, I have a question for you. On that commercial use in the shoreland overlay, what are some of the restrictions that shoreland provides that we want to be aware of as we move forward?
That's a great question. So some of the limitations that you'll find just off the top that are pretty common, specific to downtown, would be impervious surface. This is a common constraint in all shoreland areas. I would note that it's normally 25%. In this case, in the central business district, it's actually allowed to be 80. So the city has its own shoreland rules that have been kind of reviewed by the DNR. In this area, it's understood that development can be more dense or have more hardscape. That's one of the primary things that we're reviewing for. Commercial uses generally are required to receive conditional use permits as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So cutting to the chase, the rendering on the screen is what's been proposed by Roars Companies. This is an image from the corner of Rose and Arboretum Boulevard. Number of different angles of the building that have been proposed were included in the staff report and materials. So looking at the concept plan, we're seeing a 4-floor structure. This structure, again, has 149 apartment units within it. Those units range from alcoves, which are basically efficiency or studios, 1 bedroom plus den, 2 and 3 bedroom units. Note the amenities proposed on the corner of Arboretum and Rose in that sort of area that you saw in the rendering. I'll back up. Okay, you've got ground floor commercial proposed along Rose Street and 2 floors of structured parking on the, you call it the northwest corner of the site under the building. An internal surface parking lot that serves primarily the residential uses. And then parking proposed on Rose Street, which I would note in this proposal is actually proposed to move slightly to the west to allow for parking to be incorporated onto the street. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here later in the presentation. So here's a top-down overview of the site plan. Again, this was in the staff report, but it's a good kind of overview of the site. And we can go back to these, and then I'm going to walk through just floor by floor really quick. On the left, you'll see the garage or kind of basement floor plan. On the right is the first floor. You'll note the retail proposed along rows and the amenity space for the apartment units. And then floors 2 and 3 have just residential units, and then notably on the 4th floor, the same, but there's a roof deck proposed on or just off of Arboretum Boulevard there, so it'd be visible from Highway 5. So that's a little bit about the residential, more specific to the commercial. Again, 4,500 square feet of commercial space is proposed here. No tenants or uses specifically have been proposed for this space yet. We would anticipate that there's enough space for 1 to 2 different tenants in this space. I would note that the city's comprehensive plan does kind of aim to have, again, that mix of retail and residential on sites like this one. So this image on the screen really is just a close-up of what that retail would look like. One thing to note is the building materials. Another thing to note is the retail actually comes out towards the street a little bit more. So it's kind of stepping back from the retail to the apartment units. That leads me into the design review. So there are a lot of different things that we're looking at with design. Those are listed for you in the staff report. Just a kind of an overview here. The materials and colors used on this building are kind of done, they're used in a variety of different ways to present different styles. So contrasting things are, in addition, articulation of the structure so that having a 3-story building on this corner and then stepping it up back towards the back or north of the site. Those types of articulation are used to break up the scale of the structure as it appears from the street. So a good example of this is actually Victoria Flats. You can kind of see some articulation in building materials used that way. I would note that there is a ground level treatment of windows, so really trying to have a good street feel or feel between the building and those walking along this corridor. I would also note that there's a variety of different, obviously, materials used here. Those are listed on the slide. And they include primarily brick, EIFS, metal, and LP side. This slide just shows a number of different angles of the building. Now I'm going to talk really quickly about the regional trail. So this is a really notable amenity, I suppose you could say, for the site. It runs through downtown Victoria, and staff have worked with the developer to identify a really good access point, we think, for this site to that trail. And that would be right at that kind of the tip of the triangle, you could call it, which is the very west of the site. That would be a really natural opportunity for a trail connection, which, as you can see in this future or this plan here, it imagines a future trail connection into downtown West at that same point as well. And so there are some constraints in this area with the amount of land on the site, and so we are aware that the developer would have to work with both MnDOT and I think Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority is still the property owner of the trail. Just a really quick note for you on landscaping and tree preservation. We're not quite to the point in the process where we're reviewing these things closely, so we don't have any formal landscaping or tree mitigation plan submitted yet. That would be expected at the next step in the process, but this is something that staff is aware is something that the community has commented on. Okay, so parking. This is a kind of a big part of this specific request, and it was something that was discussed at the Planning Commission. This one breaks down to what will be a requirement for a 1.5 parking space per dwelling unit ratio. So the parking breaks down, there's 37 stalls that are proposed to be on Rose Street. Those would be incorporated as part of this project. There would be 225 stalls on the site. And so a vast majority of those would be structured or covered parking, but 76 would also be in that internal surface lot. So notably, other developments that have been approved in downtown Victoria with similar ratios include Cross Anderson project in downtown West and the Victoria Flats project. So a little bit quickly on the commercial the parking associated with that commercial use. So there's 37 stalls that are proposed on Rose Street. Those would be the stalls that serve that retail use. They'd be public parking stalls that are owned and maintained eventually by the city. And those stalls would kind of guide, I suppose you could say, what types of uses that end up going into that commercial space. Those commercial uses would have to be, their demand for parking would have to be satisfied by the 37 stalls. All right, one note on access, and then I'll turn it over to the city engineer for a few slides. So access, there is one point of access to this site from Rose Street. We've talked to the fire chief about how this would all work, given that there is effectively like a bridge over that access. Really what we know is that there needs to be at least 13.5 feet, which the developer is well aware of, and there has to be the ability of obviously the emergency vehicles to get in. Lastly, I would just note that all the circulation on site is served by either drives or walkways for pedestrians. And so that's really all I have on access, and I'll turn it over to Kara for more.
Hi, Kara.
Hi, Mayor, members of the City Council.
Welcome.
Thanks. So Nathan talked about access to the site, but of course the site exists within the broader context of downtown. So given some of the questions that have come up, we thought it would be a good idea to just share a little bit of background with the City Council. So this downtown master plan, which was last completed in 2018, somewhere around there, that was the last round of master planning that the city did for downtown. All of those proposed land uses and everything that was contemplated by that plan were then fed into a traffic study. So we hired SRF to complete a traffic study to really start to understand the impact of downtown on from how you get in and out of downtown. So some of the discussion back at that time was, can we build all this with the access points that we have into downtown? So that study was completed, and then obviously you're all aware, since that time, the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan was completed, which took a really specific look at Highway 5 through the downtown area. So that information helped inform the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan as well as our master plan. So all of that information is being carried forward and is used to help us make sure that we have what we need to serve the area. What the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan shows that's very important for this site is that long-term Rose Street will become restricted to right-in, right-out only. So Nathan, if you jump back a slide, you'll notice that the proposed parking on Rose Street is shown as 90-degree angle parking compared to some of the areas when you drive through downtown, it's angle parking where you're just going one direction or the other. They specifically are laying it out this way in anticipation that if an expansion, or I should say when an expansion of 5 to 4 lanes is funded in the future and Rose Street becomes restricted to right in, right out, we don't have to make any modifications to Rose Street. And the developer is aware of that future restriction. So that's just important. That'll be important for the developer, any possible tenants to understand that that's the plan. The applicant will be completing a traffic study as part of their particular project. We did have an initial conversation with the consultant that they anticipate hiring to do that work. But typically that comes in with the preliminary plat application, so we won't see that in detail until it's submitted. And then just a little bit about stormwater and utilities. So I do want to note that when we reconstructed Rose Street back in 2003, we did anticipate that this property would redevelop. So larger diameter sanitary sewer and water services are stubbed into the property for that purpose. Of course, they'll need to be reviewed as part of the preliminary plat process to make sure they're adequate to serve the proposed building. But those services are available. The other thing, though, that I wanted to touch on was that this property is served by the city's downtown regional stormwater system that was first constructed in 2003. So on the left side of the screen here, you see 2 different ponds. Those two ponds collect runoff from the existing downtown and treat that runoff before it's discharged to the wetland complex that ultimately discharges to 6 Mile Creek. That was constructed in 2003 by the city as part of our initial reconstruction of the downtown projects and was built to accommodate development of these properties so that you didn't have to have individual stormwater ponds on all of the properties within downtown. Because that was built in 2003, rules have changed since then. So some of you might recall that a few years ago, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District assisted us in obtaining a grant to expand those basins to meet the current rules that are in place. So that work was completed pre-COVID, so it's a time warp, 2018, something like that, 2019. So those basins are ready to receive runoff from this property. As part of that 2003 project, there was an area charge put in place for those stormwater improvements. So if a development moves forward on this property, one of the fees they'll need to pay is the stormwater area charge to help cover the cost of those improvements that were put back in 2003. So it isn't often that we have a site that is really ready for development from an infrastructure perspective, but this one is ready to go. So wanted to highlight those features for everyone. There is a storm sewer pipe that's running along the north side of the property that they are proposing to relocate to maximize more use of the site. Public Works and my team have reviewed that from initial perspective, and it does look like that could be accommodated, that request. Of course, we'll work through those details if a project moves forward to preliminary design.
Kara, I want to back up a minute about the traffic study. I want to talk about that a little bit, that we had previously made sure that when we were working on our comprehensive plan, that anything that we put in that comprehensive plan that the traffic would be accommodated. And you're telling us that we could put a 149 unit apartment building on that corner and traffic would not be a problem.
Yeah, so, the thing that it's important to think about relative to downtown, downtown Victoria is a fixed space that is intended to be slow-moving traffic and pedestrian-friendly. So you certainly are gonna run into circumstances where you'll have a traffic backup. Right now we'll have, at any business in downtown, when deliveries are being made for the restaurants and things, you've got to slow down and you've got to think and you've got to look around and make sure you can proceed. So, certainly a 2-lane road can accommodate all the traffic that's being generated out of here. What becomes, I think, pretty critical is the time of day and how that traffic interacts with Highway 5. Mm-hmm. So we're all aware of the challenges at Victoria Drive and Highway 5 by Floyd's with what I refer to as needing to make eye contact with the person on the other side of the road to find out if they're going to turn left or go straight. We have a need for intersection improvements there. But some of the other long-term connections are key. We do have the long-term goal of seeing Tower Boulevard connecting to Highway 5 with the revised Arboretum area transportation plan that we're moving towards. That would be at a proposed roundabout, which would give another great ingress and egress into downtown. The other big piece of the puzzle, though, is on the west side. So if you recall, there's some debate ongoing with MnDOT about what level of access we're going to be allowed to have to Highway 5 from the 13.5 acres. So we're about to embark on another level of study associated with that, which will include another round of traffic analysis. So it's something that we have to be mindful of and continue to understand. This particular developer will do a traffic study specific to your question of the 149 units. How will that affect the intersections and the areas around it? So we'll have a more precise answer to that question specific to this project as part of their traffic study.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
I'll cover a few more things,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
please.
Okay, so really quickly summarizing the neighborhood meeting. We had really good turnout at this meeting, again, January 3rd of this year. Parking requirements were a topic of conversation and questions. Concerns were raised about the massing of the structure here as proposed. There were questions about tree removal on the site, specifically along the regional trail. There were questions about the sizes of the units and the rents that they would demand. And then lastly, as Kara mentioned, a lot of conversation about traffic. So this was reviewed by the Planning Commission at their meeting last week. A lot more conversation on this again. Planning Commission raised some concern about the amount and location of retail that's provided by this developer on the site. There was concern about parking. It was noted that a study would be anticipated to be needed if the site can park itself. There were concerns about the traffic impacts, as we've discussed. The building massing again came up. The design of the structure and its compatibility with some of the other structures in downtown Victoria. Questions about tree removal again and landscaping, and lastly about the units that are proposed here in the structure. So from staff's perspective, a successful meeting this evening would really look like a conversation about the different things that the city will ultimately make decisions on. I know that the developer is really hoping that this process gives him an idea of how to move forward with this project, or maybe whether to move forward. So an indication from the council and guidance on that would be, I'm sure, very helpful. Things that we hope that you discuss, the mass of the structure and how you feel about the design proposed. Obviously, the parking would be a deviation through that planned unit development process, so that's something that the city council should discuss. Expectations for the site, including trail and streetscape features, things like that. Lastly, just general conformance with all of the different things that we've discussed in the plans and policies that the city has. So that's what I have for you as a presentation. I'm happy to take questions, and I would note the developer is here with the ability to kind of give you some information from his perspective as well.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. First. Council, that's a lot of information. Questions, comments?
I'll throw one out just to start. Is there any anticipation of using shared parking for this, or is everything for parking as proposed on the site with no spillover into, say, overnight parking on the street or any other surface lot?
Good question.
Yeah, so shared parking with adjacent uses perhaps is what you're asking about.
Similar to downtown West, how there's the shared parking with the green and the needed to get to space because there wasn't enough spaces to reach beyond the enclosed.
Sure. So all the parking that you see on the
If I could
site
finish
plan-
that 1 sec. This does put all of every unit has its own space indoors, correct?
Yes, there are more structured spaces than there are units, yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry, please.
So what I was gonna say about parking is you'll notice that all the parking on the site plan that you see here includes the structured parking. All of that would be for this particular use. Although I would note the parking on Rose Street would be public parking, so that would be parking that anyone can use. So I would imagine it's kind of shared between all of the users of downtown.
Okay. Good question. Good question. Councilmember Roberts, something on your mind?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have any specific questions, but I guess I have some comments. I mean, in general, I like the idea of having something in this area, right? It's a great spot, right? Right on Highway 5, you've got a view of the lake, slight view of the lake. I do have some concerns though. One is just the overall size. I know this is a big piece of property, but it is a very large complex. I think a lot of people have mentioned it, but where the commercial area is in the building is a bit of a concern. I think it makes more sense on 5 for people to see. But on the flip side, so some of the concerns we've heard is increased traffic, and I think I get people worried about traffic with the 149 units. Part of me says, though, right, on the flip side, I could make an argument, I think, that says, you know, yes, maybe during the morning and the late night commute, you know, if they're commuting, right, most people are working remotely now, you could see some additional traffic. But the great part about having an apartment there is that people can walk to all the businesses, right? So they're not going to be driving all downtown. I would also say, sorry, just looking at my notes. I would also say, you know, we have, you know, people, we constantly hear, right? We want a grocery store, we want pharmacy, we want clinic, right? And one of the big issues, right, we hear is more heads in the beds, right? And something like this obviously would put a lot more heads in the beds and maybe help with those type of things. You know, I think I do have a question, I guess, that so is there standards or you know, when it comes to the amount of, or our perfect idea of like when, you know, number of apartment units versus how much commercial space. So like thinking about the Gannon property, you know, that's, you know, it's obviously apples to oranges, but, you know, that's 73 apartments. And I think there was 6,000 square feet, which I think 3,000 would be for commercial use and 3 for his use. But, you know, this is double the size and not double. So I guess I'm just curious, you know, when we're looking at things this size, like, do we have standards on what we would like to see, like from a percentage or ratio?
That's a good question. The city code doesn't have a requirement within it in the zoning ordinance as to how much of a site or a building can or has to be residential or commercial. I would note the comp plan requires that at a minimum, 30% of new development in the central business district is residential. So that would tell us that, you know, looking for some, as you're saying, kind of more residents to use some of those amenities or maybe generate demand for new ones. I would note that the developer does have a presentation that might help to proactively address some questions, so that might be good to at least hear from him at some point during the meeting this evening.
Thank you.
I just have 2 other comments. You know, we've gotten some emails, you know, a couple specifically, you know, saying that they think, you know, a nice looking parking ramp in this thing with commercial would be better, which I kind of think a nice looking parking ramp is kind of an oxymoron, but I think to me that would create more traffic issues, right? Because you got a lot more people coming in to park in one general area. So I don't personally think that's a good idea. But the other thing is just you know, I think it's good that we want to diversify our housing, right? We want more apartments. We want, you know, the more apartments we have, actually, right, like supply and demand, the price hopefully will go down at some point. But I do think we need to be careful and we need to really watch, right? We've got near Lake Bridge, we've got senior housing, which we definitely need. We've got the apartment going in the West End. You know, we've got the Gannon proposal, and now we have this. And so, although I think there are positives to this, in general, I think the size is concerning to me, and then just how much, you know, like, are we overdoing the apartment?
Good. Council, questions, comments?
I'll just jump in.
Yeah, Mr. Councilmember Ivansky.
People who know me from my time on Planning Commission know I like metaphors. One of my metaphors for this is a tire kicking operation here. We don't know if we want to buy this car, and I think we need to step away a little bit from the technical aspects of it. We don't need to know right now that this is a 6-cylinder or 4-cylinder car, 8-speed transmission, 7-speed, is all-wheel drive. All those are the kind of technical things. So maybe we start to approach with a tiering system. What's the community fit? Does it fit our community? Does it take into account, how does this balance in terms of our percentage of rental versus the entire community, other communities? You know, are we seeing any viable alternatives for this site? And, you know, lastly, what does community mean? I can take away community from a structure, and does this structure look like our community? Or does this add people who will enjoy the community and bring a downtown experience? Anybody who went to the tree lighting ceremony, hopefully you did, you got a great feeling of community. We build that by putting more people in there to enjoy it, not necessarily make it, you know, if we were to say put a Hy-Vee, how many Hy-Vee employees are gonna come over to the tree lighting ceremony at the end of the day? Not many. Maybe half of the residents here do, and really feel bonded and connected and grow this community. So we have to ask, I think we have to ask ourselves that question. The parking and all that, those are technical things which we should and we're responsible for solving. And then we step back, and if we decide that, you know, hey, this is a good fit, how does that then integrate with these massing questions that we have? And anybody who watched the Planning Commission meeting from this, they did a great job with sort of flushing out some of those details and giving comments about that.
Good comments. Anything else?
I just had some,
Councilmember Rife.
they may be a little more technical, so I apologize if they are, but on the retail side, it seems like a small amount of retail for the overall footprint of it. So has there been any talk about keeping the overall footprint the same and maybe mixing that commercial side up a little bit from a square footage perspective?
This might be a good opportunity to have you come up to the podium. Is it Mr. McCarthy?
Yes.
Come on up to the podium, and you've got some things to share with us. That might answer some of the questions that we have, so.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll just give you a quick overview of the company, just really quick.
Sure,
And then I'll kind of explain to you how we've got to this point.
yeah.
Working with.
I'm going to
this-
stop you for just a second and ask you to state your name and your business for our record, please.
Sounds good. Marty McCarthy with Roars Companies. It's a Plymouth, Minnesota company.
Thank you.
And then I'll kind of help you understand some of the demand issues and why we think that, you know, all of those projects you just brought up still should be built here because there's just a major lack of supply in the market from what I see. Roars Company was founded in 2012 by Kent and Brian Roars, two brothers who grew up in Marshall, Minnesota. They started development up in the Bakken oil region, and then around 2015, when the oil market went down in that area, they started doing a lot of suburban apartment development similar to this. We've grown now quickly, and we are in dozens of states, or a dozen of states, and you can see what states we are in up there. My market that I also work in is Florida. Which is going to be great because in 2 weeks I'll be in Sarasota. And then we've got about 8,000 apartment units that we've developed since 2012, and that's like about $2 billion in real estate development since the inception of the company. So how we got here, Jen, I think you started right when we started having conversations with city staff. Which is about June of this last year, 2022. And we've been working through all different kinds of iterations with Momentum Design Group. Who's here? Jeff just showed up. And the Momentum Design Group built Victoria Flats out here, and that's one reason why I selected them to be our architect, is because they've already got a presence in the community, and they did a great job with Victoria Flats, in my opinion. So some of those things that we worked with the city on, our design, our site, and having retail. So like I said, we went through a whole bunch of different iterations of this being a C-shaped building, but then we weren't holding the frontage of Rose Street, flipping the building around, and then the mass just seemed too big on Highway 5. But we ultimately came back to this format because we're using the underground parking structure as kind of a retaining wall and building it into a part of the site that has a lot of fill from a former city project like 20 years ago. So all of that will have to be excavated and exported off of the site. So that's a really great location for the underground parking structure. So we got to this site, and actually, the first time we proposed it to the city, it didn't go all the way to the corner of Rose and Arboretum. And then staffs came back and said, can you try and get this building to really fit well? At that same time, I had met with the downtown building, or business group, and their property owners of downtown and business owners of downtown. And their concern was over parking. So when we extended that building to Arboretum, we then were able to, with the same density, a number of units, add another layer or half layer of parking on top of the first layer. So we can get back to it in a little bit, but you can see that there's actually a level and a half of parking in the building. Let's see here. And then another thing too, to reduce that scale, we brought that building to the corner and then just made that corner on Rose Street in Arboretum 3 stories. Like I mentioned, we've heard a lot about traffic and parking, and we've already hired a consultant to start traffic and parking analysis. So we're working through that process. And I think that takes us through that. One issue that we've been hearing a lot about too is design. And if you go maybe back to the first slide, which is kind of the image of the building. Our intent was really to have have the Rose Street elevation look like 3 different buildings. And I think we could maybe do a better job of that. The corner building, I think, is a really cool, modern looking building. The intent was to have the second building kind of mirror the building with the retail in it, really mirror the building that has the Noble Lion in it. It's a really cool facade. It's like an old, like London pub looking design. And then the farthest part was supposed to have more of a different appearance. It's from feedback from staff and the community, it sounds like maybe we need to do a little bit more. So if you, Nathan, keep going to that. This is something that Momentum Design Group has worked on in Hopkins. And we think that this is something we can kind of get this design to look more like, so that you do have that appearance of a more downtownish look. And I think this does a really great representation of making it look more downtowny or small town downtowny. So we've been really trying hard to be good partners to the city and to the community with this potential $50 million investment in Victoria. So like Nathan mentioned, we have spent a lot of money on this so far and would love to get some kind of feedback at the end of, should we continue on with this progress? I think you made a good point of, let's not get bogged down in the weeds. Do you want to see something happen here? Because we will work with the council and plan commission and the community trying to get a really great project in downtown.
Thank you. Council, questions for Mr. McCarthy? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I got a little bit more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I forgot about some of this demand stuff. Oh, and this one's important too. This is the building height conversation that we were having last week at Plan Commission. So the Stager Lane condos is represented up on the right-hand side, and our facade on Rose is on the left-hand side there, and the bridge you can see is in the middle. Generally, their property drops down about 10 feet. Their first floor elevation is 10 feet from where our first floor elevation is. And with the pitch of their roof, and I think this, according to Jeff, this pitch that we're showing here might not represent their exact pitch in their elevation. He thinks it's a little bit taller. It's really close to the top of our building. And so we're not going to have a lot of great views of Stager Lake because of their building. Some of our units certainly will from that front elevation on Rose, but they'll be blocked as well. However, I'd say some of the concerns too were about the clearing of trees. In their view of the trees, I don't think we're going to have much of an issue. We looked at some of the landscaping that it's further down there. And we'll certainly do a really great job of providing excellent landscaping along the trail connection side of the building. So you can see there, it's a very tall pitched roof. On to demographics. I think this is really important because I think it answers some of the questions that came up. Victoria's growth has been a hockey stick shape growth since 1970 to 2020. The lowest 10-year growth rate was 43%, 100% in 1970 from between 1960 and 1970. That's a lot. And then go to the next slide. This is important. This is census data that shows the percentage of households that are renters. And so typically in the United States, that percentage is about 35% of the population. In Minnesota, that's 28% of the population. In Minneapolis, it's 52% of the population. Big city, of course, you're gonna have more renters there. Chaska, 30%, Chanhassen 13%, Waconia 29%, and Victoria at 7%. What that's saying is just there's a need for apartments here. I think Victoria Flats has got really strong rents for a market, an outer ring suburban market, and that just proves that there's demand here for market rate apartments. And they've got a waiting list at Victoria Flats, and we think it's a great community, a lot of great restaurants, shopping, and so yeah, I think that's why we want to be here. There's certainly a demand for it here.
Sure, thank you. Okay. Anything else, Mr. McCarthy, from you? Okay. Questions for Mr. McCarthy?
I think I just want to give Mr. McCarthy some rapid fire feedback because we were trying to move on to the next thing. I've heard some really good feedback about that modern element down at the getting that integrated. I mean, and I've heard other things that people like Excelsior, and they like that look and feel. Well, Excelsior is the way it is because things have been plunked down year after year after year after year, and you have a culmination into what it is. We're trying to recreate that in one snap. So that being said, perhaps maybe an idea is like the Hopkins piece that you just showed us. I think that feels a little bit more like the element, although that's brought a little bit closer to the street. You're looking to move back from the street. Maybe some playing with the idea of your resident feature being flipped to the other corner. Lower that, put your roof deck over there so that people's roof deck is not hearing Floyd's, hearing Highway 5 going by, and move that more square blockish element maybe to anchor that. And then perhaps with the traffic situation, that keyhole, as I'm going to call it, it seems to be close to that intersection. So as you have people leaving, you will, until that becomes in and out, somebody's going to stack themselves up and try to turn left out of there. And then that's going to stack everybody who wants to turn right to go on 5. It'll block people from being able to turn left out of the parking lot to go up rows to go around, that's going to create this. So maybe perhaps the keyhole shifts a little bit further north, and you tuck that keyhole by a way you've got enough room to swing down into the ramp, and then gets you a little bit more loading space on Rose Street so that it tamps down that, circumventing need of going around that.
Yeah.
So just quick ideas. I don't want to take too much time.
No, that's fine. That's great. And I can kind of give you a little bit of sense of kind of how we came to this design this way. And the conversations we've been having is we have been considering lately, should we move the retail to the corner? And we're open to that conversation. That's been things that the staff has mentioned to us. We're open to that. As far as putting the amenity more central, I think that's possible. It would make a better apartment location than all the amenities are centralized for the building. The rationale behind putting the retail where it's at currently was just that it's in front of the parking layout as it is right now. And then the reason why we've set the building back a little bit off of the street is because we're trying to give back as much parking to the downtown as possible.
Thank you. And any other comments from council? Councilmember Gunderson.
Yeah, this is, I mean, more general, so not quite to the developer. But when I envision driving west on 5, we're gonna see a building this size and scope, potentially. So if it is this size and scope, I would want it to be something that pulls me in as a vision of what's there, to be able to utilize downtown. My concern, much like it was with Victoria Flats, is if there's no retail, what's pulling people in to be there? Victoria Flats works in its position because once you get downtown, you see it. And from the get-go, I supported that project. In this particular instance, both ways, going west, for one, it's you turning in there if you miss the turn at the light at downtown. And two, if you're coming east, again, you're seeing it as a flagship. It's our flagship corner for new development or redevelopment in this case, but a new building with retail. I echo a lot of the same questions that my council mates and the mayor have already asked regarding retail and the limited number and space. But if we're gonna have something down there, what's pulling me in to use it? It's great to have new residents come downtown and live downtown, but we also want people to come from outside and see. We see Victoria as a destination, as a place to eat, as a place to fish, as a place to walk on trails and go biking, and do all of that. So what's doing that? And that's what we want to see. Should not speak for my council mates, but that's what I want to see. Something that's going to make me want to go down there and drive on Rose Street, park on Rose Street, and walk in Victoria. So just some constructive feedback, and I appreciate all the time you put into this. I know that it's not cheap or quick, but it's certainly worth having more conversations.
Sounds good. Your comment about retail, we've talked to retail brokers about the location. We've gotten preliminary feedback that's, Victoria's a great spot. I've driven around and seen no vacancy in retail. So we're open to retail. We think it's a great opportunity to put retail in this building. And I think there's different ways to lay it out in this building, no problem. And we will be hiring a retail broker at some point. Usually we'll start identifying who those tenants would be closer to the building starting to open up. I've had a lot of experience with development in previous companies, and it's usually when we'll probably hire a broker right when we start construction, and we'll start getting offers right when the building is like finished built, because the retailers tend to only want to see the building space. They don't want to put together a lease based off of just some plans. They need to see it. It has to be a tangible thing in front of them.
Good.
On that, so I don't think, my concern isn't finding someone to get in that space, because like you said, I don't think we're gonna have any problem.
I agree.
My biggest concern is, can you find a way to increase that space a little bit? Because like you said, there is a big demand for people who want to have commercial space, right? There's just not enough here, right? And we want to see more commercial, right, to help our tax base. So that would be my biggest thing, is like, if we're gonna have this big, large apartment complex, is there a way, and I know you need so many apartments to hit your bottom line, but is there a way we can find more space for more commercial? Sure. So just again, just a comment.
Yeah, I think we can add, some more.
Okay.
The corner building is about, I think that footprint is about 6,000 square feet. I think adding another 1,000 square feet would be appropriate to 55,000 or 5,500. That would be a big building.
Not sure we could fill all that.
No, I'm not sure, but, yeah, no, I think we could work with the council on that.
You know, I think we've had a good discussion. I hope we've given you guys some things to think about. I think I just wanted to reiterate, you know, a lot of the comments that you've already heard. The mass of this building, it feels really big for this corner. It feels like it's gonna close up Highway 5. We've got some, you know, expansion of that road coming hopefully, and I'm a little concerned about traffic counts. We've heard a lot of concern about that. We've heard a lot of concern about how this thing looks. You know, we really want this to look like it's been in Victoria for its entire life. And we want it to match the character of the rest of the town. You know, Councilmember Ivansky mentioned, you know, we're trying to do this all at one time and make it look like it happened over time. But I think that's really important. It's important to how that building feels. Parking, we've said enough about parking, we've said enough about traffic. I think we can get there. I think we can work with you. But those are a few things that we need to address.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
All right, any final comments from council? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
With that, we're going to move on to our next agenda item. We have 3 applicants here for 2 open positions to our planning commission. We received applications via email, and staff have printed hard copies for us this evening along with our interview questions. So we're going to have our planning commission candidates kind of step up here to the table. And we have 3 applicants and 3 questions. And so each of you will have an opportunity to answer each of the questions. And we're going to start, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves to start with. So, Mr. Westerman, let's start with you.
So my name is Jacob Westman, no ER, that's all right.
Oh, Westman. Oh, sorry, we got that wrong.
I moved to Victoria in July this year, so I'm relatively new. I work in data, I'm a healthcare economist at a company called Lifespark. I have a couple of graduate degrees in math and economics, used to be a math instructor at Mankato State University. I enjoy reading, you know, the documents that I remember ever discussed in the application, so I read lots of legal stuff.
Awesome, thank you. Kyle, you're next.
My name is Kyle Hummel. I use he, him pronouns. I've lived in Victoria all 18 years of my life, so I am one of the younger candidates. I really love this city. I find city planning fascinating. As opposed to a lot of other people my age, I enjoy reading up on things this council discusses, things the planning commission discusses, and city planning as a whole. I think it's a very fascinating subject. I feel my young age might set some people off, but I feel it also serves me to have, as a benefit to myself, having this younger scope. I think that could contribute a lot to the commission as a whole.
Perfect, thank you. Is it Racius?
Racius.
Racius,
Close
Mr.
enough.
Racius.
Thank you. My name is Al Racius, and I am a recent transplant to Minnesota and to Victoria, having moved here in September with my wife. We moved from a little town called Thousand Oaks in Southern California. So it's a little bit of a climate shock for us, but we're enjoying it. Sort of got tired of looking at sand and concrete, and it's one of the reasons we picked Minnesota and Victoria in particular. My background is basically, I've been a business owner, self-employed for 22 years. Prior to that, I worked for several large companies, predominantly in the food and beverage industries, in various executive management positions. I'm currently retired, so I do have time to devote to looking what can make Victoria more of the place that we really selected to live in and make it better in the future.
Awesome, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, let's start with Mr. Westman. The first question, we're gonna have each of you answer the first question, then we'll come back. Mr. Hummel, you can start the next one, and we'll get everybody answered. So, the first question is, how would you resolve a situation as a planning commissioner in which you do not agree with the other commissioners on an important development issue? Mr. Westman, you're first.
So I guess in a situation in which I don't agree, I would have to check my assumptions and biases onto why I don't agree with it and try to understand the other viewpoint. If I feel very firmly in what I believe, I might stick my grounds, but if I start to see the other side, I would maybe, start to believe their argument a little bit more.
Terrific. Mr. Umo, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I got it.
Okay, perfect.
I spent about 2 minutes on the debate team, so I'm not looking to start any fights. My extracurricular background is in a speech category called discussion, so obviously I would really like to discuss it and see, obviously, both sides of the issue. As Mr. Wisterman said, check my own biases and see if I am really in the right here, and if I do firmly believe it, I will gladly hold my ground because when I need to be, can be a very opinionated person. But if I do see that compromise is the only way forward, I would be more than happy to compromise.
Terrific. Mr. Rosias?
I agree with the prior two gentlemen. I believe that you really need to take a close, hard look at both sides of the story. There's always got to be a compromise that is favorable for both parties. In order for a project to go on or a sale to go on, it's got to be a win-win situation for everybody. And I think there's also not only taking a look at my own beliefs, but trying to convince the other guy that I'm right as well. Not always taking his word for all of his assumptions.
All right, very good, thank you. All right, Mr. Umo, you're next with this question. You're first with this next question, is how I'll say that. Are you willing to take on the responsibility of making decisions that are in the best interest of the public, even though they might be somewhat controversial?
Yes, I feel that having lived here all 18 years of my life, I do have a pretty good idea of what would be best for this community. And living here, I really feel that having that experience allows me this unique perspective to know going forward, because this city is experiencing large growth, and I feel that going forward, I feel like I have a good scope on seeing what's right. And even if it is controversial, I feel that if it is the right decision, it's the right decision. And there isn't always going to be an absolute answer that serves everyone equally, but I feel that the option that serves the community best will be the answer that serves the community best, and I'd be willing to go forward with it even if it is, as you said, controversial.
Terrific. Mr. Rosias, you're next.
I also believe that you need to make the decision that's best not only for the people that live in the city, but for the city itself. There are a number of factors, I'm sure, that would involve everybody, residents and the city, to gain from a particular development or a particular parcel. So I really believe you need to take a look at both. And yes, I'm willing to say anything that makes it right for everybody.
Terrific. Thank you. Mr. Westman?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. Are you willing to take on the responsibility of making decisions that are in the best interest of the public, even though they may be somewhat controversial?
Yes, decision-making is one of my strengths. I think I'm very good at making decisions and articulating why I make the decision. I often had to explain to my students when I was teaching at MSU why I was making decisions I made, despite them not always agreeing with me. But even, as I have worked in healthcare, I make a lot of decisions based off data that people don't agree with always, but, I articulate why I'm making them, and if they're controversial to start, I'll usually, stand my ground, and people usually will start to see my way once they get to see the data.
Thank you. Mr. Rosias, you're up first on this next question. Describe your understanding of the relationship and interaction between the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Quite honestly, I don't have a great understanding of it. My brief knowledge of that would be that the Planning Commission takes a look at a particular project that is put forth, takes a look at it, sees whether it should or should not go forward, for what reasons, and then present it to the City Council for their ultimate approval. It's got to be, again, as I've mentioned a couple times, a win-win for everybody. It's not only the City Planning Commission that brings forth all of the reasons why I think there's a lot of learning to be done, and then presenting it to the city council in a very concise manner that they can make a decision with all the facts that they need.
Thank you. Mr. Westman?
Repeat the question again?
Sure. Describe your understanding of the relationship and interaction between the Planning Commission and the City Council.
I'm not 1,000% clear, but my understanding is that there will be proposals for expansions in areas, and that the planning commission will have to review the documents in order to determine whether the zoning and everything works, and then present the findings to city council to help the decisions be made.
Terrific. Mr. Ewell?
I'm kind of glad that I got to go last on this question, just so I could get a better understanding of what the other applicants have in mind. But basically, what the other applicants did state, basically an advisory council that does review decisions, see if it would be a good idea or not to go forward with them, and then present their findings to the council.
All right, terrific. Council, questions for these gentlemen? Yeah, Mr. Gunderson, Councilmember Gunderson.
For all three of you, this seems to focus a lot on flashy items that come before the council. I can tell you as vice chair, that's few and far between. It's very boring. And normally it's not a room full of people, it's a blank room with just the cameras on you. How are you with the monotonous day-to-day, week-to-week, same issues maybe coming up 3 weeks in a row or 3 meetings in a row, whatever it might be, and having to maybe answer sometimes the same question or ask the same question because you're not getting the right answer. Basically, how quickly do you become bored? And can you push through that to get to some of these other questions? And Mayor, I'll defer to you to.
Yeah, Mr. Westman, please.
I don't get bored by anything really. I find everything interesting. That's one of my faults, honestly. But answering the same question over and over is just something I've been doing since I went to grad school in math. It's every single day someone's asking the same question: how do I solve this problem? And so, I would have to help them. I was at a tutoring center when I wasn't having office hours, so you also have to find different ways to communicate it to different people. So I also think that's fun.
All right, terrific. Mr. Umel, you're next.
Well, I am still currently going to school, so I find it necessary to not get bored very easily to get by. That being said, I overall think the idea of city planning is very interesting, and there's a lot of interesting nuances in it. But as you said, I feel that can get monotonous. But I feel that is a strong suit in any person, in being able to have a consistent stance on something, and be able to always go back to it without necessarily losing your grip or getting bored. So I feel that I do find this subject matter interesting, which might be different for other people my age, but I think just having that consistency is of strength of mine.
All right, Mr. Macias.
I really feel that while certain subjects may lead to some boredom, I think you need to dig deeper every time you hear the question and see, what did I miss? What else can I do? What else is there that I'm missing somehow? And I think that type of thinking keeps you from getting bored, even though it's the same question. And it seems like every time you dig a little deeper, you're going to find that you need to dig deeper than that to maybe come up with the ultimate solution. Excuse me.
And let me add, you will learn a lot and you will meet some wonderful people.
Thank you.
Even though it might be boring at times, you will learn a lot. No. Other questions? Councilmember Roberts.
Yeah, so I know, in question 2, we asked kind of about how making the best decision for the city, but what about how do you handle conflict, right? So it might not be with the public who maybe disagrees with what we're doing. It might be, a developer is in front of you and you disagree with, something they're doing, or whatever, right? Like it could be another commissioner that you disagree with. How do you handle conflict?
Mr. Umel, why don't you start with that one?
Like I previously stated, I am in discussion, and you are scored based on how well you can work with others. So I am really well versed on being able to talk someone or in conflict down without necessarily being aggressive myself. So I feel that is one of my greater strengths, being able to resolve conflict without necessarily engaging in it. Like we said previously, compromise is always the ultimate goal, but but sometimes that isn't able to be reached. So I think the ability to say no is another one of my strengths. So if if the other person, in my opinion, is outrageously wrong, I would be very willing to just say no. But obviously that would be a last resort option. But yeah, I feel that being able to resolve conflict without necessarily engaging it is one of my bigger strengths.
Thank you. Mr. Macias.
I think one of the main things in resolving conflict is the ability to listen. Listen to what the other person's saying, listen to what their points are. Why are they getting so upset? Work on those points with them, try to get into a good discussion, but I think listening is really a key to solving many problems. You have to understand where they're coming from. And as a couple of gentlemen said before, sometimes you have to negotiate and maybe take a look at your stance as well, but listening is the key.
Thank you. Mr. Westman.
So I think one of the things I try to do to minimize conflict first is to set clear expectations of what needs to be discussed and how to answer them. And then if the conflict arises, it's often because those expectations weren't met. And then if you set the expectations clearly, you can go and say, these were the expectations, you did not meet them, and then try to discuss and help them figure out why they didn't meet them, or help them, just understand why they're not meeting your expectations, I guess. I also think that hearing the person is very helpful as well. No one wants to be ignored and not heard, so I try to take that into account as well.
Terrific. Thank you. Council, any other questions? Yeah.
I actually do, so
Okay, Councilmember Rife, let's start with you.
let's start with you.
Just a general question. What do you love about Victoria, number one? And number two, what could Victoria work on?
Mr.
general.
Macias, why don't you take that one first?
Well, coming from Southern California and living in Los Angeles, to me, it's a small town feel. That's one of the things that my wife and I were looking for, was to get away from the madness of the city. And I think that's what we found here. Even though Victoria wants to expand, and rightfully so, because it's a beautiful place, the small town feel, the recreational amenities that are offered, and the people that we've met so far have been absolutely fantastic. That's our opinion of the city.
Thank you. Mr. Westman.
I actually, this was several years ago, like 2017, I was biking from Mankato to my apartment in Minnetonka, and I randomly came upon Victoria. I'd never heard of it before. And I biked through, and I was like, how come I've never heard of this? This town looks amazing. And I wanted to move here ever since. I finally got a house this year. I love the small town feel. I love the restaurants. I love the coffee shop. I love all the trails. I bike everywhere in the summer. I use all the, Monarch and all the other mountain bike trails that are here. It's just a great place to be. I mean, I can just bike down to downtown in 2 minutes and grab a beer at dinner and bike home and, have a good time. It's just a great place.
Mr. Umel.
As the other two gentlemen have stated, I really just like the small town nature of this, but I think one key word that I really enjoy about this city is the connectivity of it all. I live just down the bike path right off of 5, and just the ability just to walk across 5, walk down the path, and get a scoop of ice cream, and then just read a book that I got from the library. I really like that feeling. I also like the connectivity of the people. I used to go to St. Victoria, and I met some friends there, and obviously still going to school here, I have plenty of friends just around, but the ability just to, no matter where they are, be able to get to their house in less than 5 minutes. I feel like that connectivity is just another great aspect of the city.
Awesome. Anything else,
I'll just ask
Councilmember
one more
Rife?
quick question, if I could. We've spent a lot of time asking you gentlemen about questions and how you deal with conflict. So you might be coming away from the impression that planning commission meetings are a bar brawl. They are. That said, I'm just tongue-in-cheek. My question is more philosophical for each of you, and that is, what do you view the role of the planning commission is? Do you view it as a gatekeeper role or a development role? Just your quick view on that. And
Mr. Umel, let's start with you. I think it's your turn. I kind of lost track here, but let's start with you, Mr. Umel.
Could you repeat the second part of the question?
sure, do you feel that the planning commission is a gatekeeping role for the city or a development role?
I think it can truly be both, but I think at its fullest potential, it is more of a creationary role. Because if we are faced with a lot of decisions that we find to be a negative, I think that yes, it is necessary for it to gatekeep a lot of those decisions. But if we're faced with a time of growth like we are now, I feel like at its truest potential, we can create a lot of growth and make a lot of decisions that will improve the city.
Mr. Macias.
I think it's a little bit more of a gatekeeper role myself. You know, if you take a look at a lot of cities, let me give you an example. We lived in Thousand Oaks, California for 41 years. When we first moved there, the population was approximately 50,000 people. As we left, it was about 125 to 130,000. And a lot of people there were really complaining about the growth of the city, how it grew too fast. We're getting rid of all the open space. We're going against some of the planning objectives that we had 20, 25, 30 years ago. And I think that the Planning Commission there maybe did not do as good a job in really safeguarding the assets of the city and opening it up to too much development. So I think it might be a little bit more of a gatekeeping opportunity too.
Thank you. Mr. Westman.
I would say fundamentally I view it as the role to interpret the rules and regulations as they exist, and hopefully working with city council to determine if everything still, all the rules and regulations are serving the city the best they are. But yeah, interpret the rules as they exist.
Terrific. All right, anything else from council for our candidates? All right, so I think what we're gonna do at this point, we're gonna defer our deliberation to our regular council meeting. So I'm going to take a motion to adjourn our workshop, and then we will reconvene and have our discussion about our appointments. So with that, council, can I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We stand adjourned. It'll be about